to make up for not being here tomorrow morning, after a decent interval in which people who want to leave are very politely asked to do so, we'd be very happy to answer questions. And you should just say which person you want to answer.
Breath at least 20 times, and everyone else's breath at least 40 times. But at the risk of suffocating us all, I'll ask for questions now.
The question was that we were saying that decorated sheds were generally more appropriate than ducts, but as we define them, but that the houses we showed were very often more like ducts, and I would just say yes, that's true. The case in this case, because the houses were special buildings for individuals who could who required special architectural symbolism, if you will. So they might have some of that quality. You can't be too doctrinaire with your own theories.
So we don't get housing?
We don't get housing. If we got housing, they would not be ducts, because housing should not be ducts, just as even the housing on Bedford Square were not ducts. I mean, it's not a question of the... Did our clients have much say in the design of the houses, or did they give us a fairly free hand? It depends on the client, and naturally our approach very much is not to be arrogant and to, as much as possible, accommodate to the requirements of the client. We feel very much that the architect is a servant of the client to the extent that the client isn't requiring him to do something that he considers completely, against his standards.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
In those houses, those clients came to us because they wanted what we do. So it gave us a common ground, as it was. There was one house where the clients said to us, they were quite specific about their functional requirements and their budget. They said, after that, we're very busy people, you're better than we are, do it. It was sort of unnerving to us. On the other hand, the house, the greenhouse and the Vale house and the Bermuda house have been very, very strong input from the client. And you can see that they're art collectors themselves. They found that furniture themselves, for example. And so they have very strong ideas, many of which have been written to us in a written brief talking about character. The little house in the woods, the same thing. This young man is a poet, and he sent us a long semi-poem. It was called Portrait of the House as Myself. It was a very beautiful poetic thing. And he said things like, the house is shy, and it's should be found by a winding way. But when you get there, it should be modest but eloquent. And he was quite specific. He said it should have a large room. Books should be seen, should be glimpsed from somewhere else. Light should come from unexpected places. These were all things he put in his first brief to us. And I think if you remember the plan, we managed to do all those things. Yes, we did have one disagreement with him. We wanted green and white striped curtains in the bedroom. And he said he couldn't stand those curtains. They reminded him of debutantes' tents for debutantes' parties, and he didn't want them. And we said, no, you have to have them. And then we went away and we changed our minds, and we decided what he wanted was better anyway. So he was very amused because in the end he said, well, I won that one after I'd come round to your way of thinking. So that's sort of this kind of, you can have that kind of give and take with people who've come to you because they want you and that you feel very sympathetic with. It's a whole other story if you're not going to meet your clients, your users. You might very well meet someone in the Planning Commission or the Redevelopment Authority who thinks they know what the people want. Any more questions? Everyone stayed because they wanted to hear questions and then no one was prepared to ask one.
Denise, can I ask you? I have to stand far away if I'm going to ask this.
Me or?
Both. I was wondering if you had, if one goes back to the question of popular codes, a strange pattern emerges, and that is that 5 of your commissions were rejected by fine arts groups or whatever, and this outcry from New York critics about the Whitney Gallery, and you mentioned a client not liking your green curtains and so forth. Is it not true that you have kind of personal biases towards the ugly and ordinary, which are not necessarily the biases of the popular code? In fact, they are, I would say, importations from high art or your previous sensibility, or maybe that's too strong a way of putting it, but a training in the Lou Kahn School of Architecture, where, in fact, in the early work of Bob's, you can see a lot of those elements of what was called cardboard architecture, I think. And so, in fact, from the outside, from a great distance, down the wrong end of a telescope, your work looks rather like that of, say, the work of the New York Five, except it has certain symbols attached. What I'm trying to say is that there is a distinction to be made between your sensibility and your theory. I really feel it very strongly, that your theory is going more and more towards trying to be an inclusive architecture, because that's what you believe in, but your sensibility is still slightly exclusivist and based on esoteric codes or codes which have to do with your personal bias rather than, say, Las Vegas, in the sense that, the signs you produce don't have that commercial, capitalistic urge to win that Las Vegas signs have. They don't have that kind of, they're abstractions from it.
To deal with the signs, we have never had those clients. Our clients have been civic entities who want pretty signs. So in terms of the position we are in, I keep coming back with you to that, the position we are in. We could not do signs which were like Las Vegas signs. That's the first thing. We've never said that we take the popular culture and reproduce it. We say we're learning from it. How we learn and what we learn is not altogether definable, because it comes out, we're not people who are now writing lessons. We're artists and architects who are, it's going through a mesh of ourselves, and part of it is an intuitive learning. I don't know where the Lou Kahn thing comes in, but we certainly are elitist architects, and we would be kidding ourselves if we said we weren't. If you take Gans's terminology, and now don't blame me for this terminology, I didn't invent it, and don't even blame Gans. It's the sociologists of stratification who have invented it. High culture, upper middle culture, lower middle culture, I forget how it goes after that, popular culture, and there are 5 of them anyway, folk culture. Now, our point is that whether we like it or not, we are pigeonholed in this thing called high culture. And even by the time someone from popular culture comes to us, they don't want that. They want a little bit of high culture from us. So we can very well say that as architects working with individual clients, whatever we say, that's what they want from us. Now, as urbanists, as urban designers, as planners working in a planning commission, that's another matter. We can't afford to make a housing project full of Brandt houses, because the Brandts have very different taste from most people. We have to find something more general. I'd say our Guild House is more general. Guild House is occupied by many different people, from retired Haverford professors to that old lady you saw with her antimacassars. Now, we tried to find something that they would all like. That's a very tall order, and apparently the main index of whether people like Guild House is what they had before. And people who'd come from a suburban house, they just find living in a flat a come down, whatever. But that's been our aim, and I think there's a difference between Guild House and the Brand House for that reason. So each time I come back to that, we are high culture architects. We have a very, very thin national market. That's one of the reasons we're here now. We have no work, and one of the reasons we have no work is we have this very narrow market. Now, high culture artists reserve their maximum scorn, as do we, for upper middle culture, because they think that they sold out, they prettified. They're what Gans quotes Dwight MacDonald as calling mid-cult. And mid-cult are the prettifiers. Well, we very cynically say we have to be co-opted by mid-cult because that's where all the architectural clients sit. So to the extent that we have a market, and pardon me for being crass, I think we just have to analyze these things in terms of markets for our survival. We have a market in high culture. We have somewhat of a market in lower middle culture. For example, the firemen and the fire stations like our buildings and wonder what all the fuss is about because they think of them as down-to-earth buildings. In the same way as the people at the Renwick show, most of them liked what they saw. We've got this problem with the kind of semi-educated people with cultural aspirations, people who have a certain amount of cultural training, and especially they've got religion and they know what's right, and by golly, we're not doing it. So that's that huge market that we ought to be breaking our way into and that we don't somehow manage to make, but assuredly the New York Five will, and I think there's considerable difference between us and the New York Five.
Right. Going back into history, how do you describe the use of science in Russian constructivism and thus its had an impact on your work?
Actually, that source did not affect us much, although naturally you're aware of it. I mean, there were also, who was the other international style graphic artist who used big signs in the 20s? Le Corbusier also, but there was another graphic artist whom we all know, Herbert Bayer, maybe it was. Yeah, who did. And, I don't know, I think there is a difference, and I think the difference is that theirs were very compositionally correct, generally not representational, did not have an element of irony that ours would have in them. They're terrific. There's no question they are, absolutely fabulous. I mean, they're compositionally beautifully graphic. They're really more connected with super graphics, I think, than with, which is a little different from what we're saying, perhaps. But I think essentially our reliance on advertising art as a source of the advertising commercial persuasion quality is significantly different from that kind of graphics, which is, well, I don't know, maybe more in the tradition of the graphics you find on the balustrade of a Jacobean house or the pediment of a Roman, or the Parthenon of the Pantheon or something like that, of big civic graphics. There's that tradition too. I would say that's more in that tradition than in the kind of ironical use of commercial persuasion and the kind of, popular culture quality that the latter has. What else would you say to that? Yeah.
From the text I knew from you and also from your work, I think in Europe people generally suppose that there is kind of irony to your work, both of them. But in a strange way, the way you began to talk, the way you showed the two pictures next to each other, the Rome and somewhere in Las Vegas, or I don't know where, you seem to be incredibly serious about it. So rather sad. And it reminded me very well of my experience I had first when I went to Disneyland, where I thought it should be something funny, even if I didn't like it. But immediately when I saw incredible sadness in the people's faces. And there was no kind of irony at all. And I think it's kind of hades you want to go through, because you don't like it. But it's your world, and you suppose we have to like it, and we have to do the best out of it. What I think is going here is really a kind of state of mind, which is going from cynicism to extreme sadism, or kind of masochism, which might be alright for America, but I don't know America that well, but which is very begins to be rather dramatic in Europe, because this kind of culture is coming over here in extreme strength, and it's becoming embarrassing.
That's your problem. I'm very sorry about that. I really am. I mean, I like the piazzas of Rome and the squares of London as much as you do. And if you're going to go fill them up with vulgarities, it makes sense in the plains of the Southwest, but not in your setting. That's very sad, and I'm very sorry about it. That's your responsibility. I really don't see the sadness in the faces people, in the people's faces. They're enormous commercial successes, Las Vegas and Disneyland, and I don't think there's any coercion. People spend a lot of money going there, and I don't know, maybe I'm very simple-minded. It just seems to me that might mean they like it.
What I want to get at is that, really to clarify the position you have, is really to say that you are cynical.
No. No, we're not cynical.
Or what are you?
We're very, very serious.
But I would say that this kind of serosity is the lowest level of opportunism you could meet nowadays. It's the lowest level of opportunism, which I can imagine nowadays.
Well, we certainly have suffered enormously by learning from Las Vegas. We have suffered materially. We've suffered in terms of commissions. If we had wanted to be opportunistic, we would have jumped on another bandwagon, not that one.
Just try to get a world somewhere. You just try to get commercials into the realm of high art, which is still very isolated.
We've done this
which
because
still exists in bourgeois society, but on a very small level.
I don't understand this bourgeois society thing. We're all very bourgeois here, all of us, you too. So, let's go from where we are. But let me just put it this way. There's a level of irony in our work, and it's our approach to the human condition, which is sinful and saintly, great and terrible, frightening and poignantly lovely. Now, if you see all these ironies and contrasts in the human condition, there are two things you could do. You could laugh or you could cry. Now, we laugh in order not to cry, to a certain extent. We become ironists rather than revolutionaries because it seems that in our context this makes more sense. From the urban context, we talked this morning about what we've seen of revolutionary architecture as opposed to revolutionary politics or economics. Revolutionary architecture is, it doesn't work, it's socially coercive. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't march on Washington as people. But when you get back from Washington, you're going to be an architect. Are you really going to raise the whole city because it's full of evil people? That's what they said in the 20s, and it didn't work. It caused the very people that you had in mind as saving the worst harm. So we see this situation as powerless in our role as architects. We don't have the powers, and if we did have them, I dread to think what most architects would do. What they have done is bad enough. So we see that then as ironists. We move a little, we do a little, we look around us, we see what people have liked. We try to be much less directive, much less authoritarian, and much less vicious than we've seen in the last 30 years in architecture.
It certainly sounds so, but if one analyzes really the content of the first two pictures which Venturi showed, then you have the Roman architecture, both the popular and the high art symbols. On the other hand, you have very direct signs, and you pretend that they are symbols, but if you really look at them, they're nothing but signs which are completely active.
Well, I don't know these rather arcane differences between...
Just go on for 1 second. Now, through Kevin Lynch, there is this pretense, that this amalgamation of signs creates just as viable an environment as the traditional, say, European code made. But if you look at the European code, there might be repetition. There is typological repetition of churches of simple houses. But they are all different. You know, they are all types, but they are all different. If you look at these signs you find in America, they are all the same. And
we have never supported the content of the signs, we have analyzed their technique. Now, American signs, British signs, they're the same thing in many ways. They appeal to very deep motivations, sex drives, social status drives, which are deep human motivations. They send them very vapid messages. In the same way, Chartres Cathedral appealed to very profound, using its techniques, very profound human emotions. It stood for some of the bloodiest Christianity that ever existed in the world. So, you know, what are you going to say? The content of the signs was evil in each case. The techniques are what interest us. We've tried to show you a transference of the commercial techniques to civic techniques in our own way in the City Edges project, for example, and to some extent in the California City one, although those were more or less commercial. But we've tried to transfer the content while learning the techniques. The fact that I like Chartres Cathedral doesn't, believe me, mean that I support medieval Christianity. The fact that I like Haussmann's Paris does not mean that I liked Haussmann's politics.
But it avoids somehow the question we just tried to discuss, which was the thing that in one case you have repetition with the ability to create a place, and on the other hand you have repetition which doesn't create a place, but you pretend that you can create a place.
We have suggested that European type place doesn't apply in parts of America, and that where it has been applied in American cities, it's had great social harm. That's all the urban renewal projects which cleared to make your nice European place, cleared out the poor to do it, brought in the so-called rich, but they didn't even come in with their tax money, they just came from other parts of the city, so that it was the same taxes anyway, was socially coercive and was a boondoggle for builders. That's so much for the European piazza as place in America. No one goes to those places. Who sits in there? No one. They don't even dare put seats in them. They're afraid bombs will come.
Perhaps we could say here that high art was always a kind of sublimation of incredible cruelties which lay behind, which lay really in the class society itself. But in your type of proposal, there is not even the excuse to any culture.
We think that we stand for very high culture. And that...
that's why I say it's just pretension.
Well, only time will tell whether we're right or you. We think we will bury you, but that's, you know, only time will tell. And of course, there has been a long history throughout high art of new forms of high art outraging the critics and the fine arts commissions, and that's our problem. That's a very long historical problem, that changes of sensibility, new forms which result from new sensibilities, which basically have their origin in changing social patterns, are always met with outrage at the hands of the establishment. You at this point represent establishment thinking. I know it's horrible to you to think so. Yes.
Don't you feel you in fact in your civic and urban work and not so much in the building work, but the choice of symbology that you use does reflect a very serious political point of view?
Well, I'm trying to say we have a serious political point of view.
Don't you reaffirm a certain portion, a segment of American culture?
Sorry.
In fact, you don't represent the most urban centers of cities in any of your urban projects, nor in their beliefs, nor in their aspirations. But you do reflect a segment of society, of American culture, which is extremely perverse, and it's not a major segment in American culture. You don't represent the major urban fabric. You don't represent the poor people in the cities. You don't represent any of those segments.
We have represented poor people in the cities. Quite specifically, we have been their representatives to fight the Planning Commission for them.
I'm talking about a choice of symbology. I'm not talking about the literal act of what you do, but in fact the images and symbology that you use are reflections of a certain political point of view in that culture.
Well, I don't
It's like hanging a huge Coca-Cola sign. I mean, choosing the Benjamin Franklin house to place in that plaza as a bicentennial exhibition, to me as an American living in an urban city, in New York City, is an affront to my political point of view and that culture. And I don't think it's an avant-garde position to be in. I think it's an extremely rear seat position to be in culturally.
I don't get you. What was this about the Benjamin Franklin House? We were told to represent a Benjamin Franklin House in Philadelphia.
You have a choice as a professional, as a choice of symbol, to turn that commission down as one responsibility, or to provide an alternative symbol.
No, wait a moment. What have you got against Benjamin Franklin? Let's get this out. You as an all-American American have got something against Benjamin Franklin. I'd like to hear this.
I don't believe that's relevant to the question.
Well,
I think you understand.
No, then you really have me puzzled, quite honestly puzzled. I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't.
I'm talking about a political point of view.
Yes,
obviously,
no.
you don't reflect. You reflect a segment of American culture which I personally find offensive. And I
No,
don't
but wait a
find
minute. You say that my being prepared. No, I'm very interested to know because I can't work out what segment you represent.
I don't
compared with
represent
what-
any segment, but I'm not standing up at the podium trying to represent a segment, you know?
No. I'm puzzled. I don't know. The point of view is that